Thanks for joining me again and welcome back to this lesson of Simple Storage Services. S3 or Simple Storage Service is an online bulk storage service. Now, this is an object storage service from Amazon Web Services. S3 has a simple web interface that you can use to store and retrieve any amount of data at any time from anywhere. It gives you the user access to the same infrastructure that AWS uses to run its own global network of websites. It is really fast, highly scalable, reliable, and inexpensive. Now, that's the term which most of the businesses are looking for. So, this service S3 aims to maximize benefits of scale to pass those benefits on to you. So essentially, AWS has large amounts of storage space available, and they're making that storage available to others in order for everyone to get benefit of the scalability of the storage space at a significantly low cost. In the previous lesson, we did mention about two main kinds of storage, which is bulk storage, S3, or an object storage, and we also spoke about block-based storage or block storage. Well, S3 is that bulk-based storage that we are referring to, okay? Essentially, at the root level, you will go ahead and create something called as buckets. Buckets is where your data will go and reside. You can have multiple buckets at the root level and then thousands of files inside each bucket. So what you're creating here is an hierarchy of files inside that bucket that you store on S3. Now, instead of just talking about it, let's go ahead and look at the S3 inside AWS. I'm right now logged into the AWS console with my root account. I'll click on Services and then click on S3, Simple Storage Services, Object Storage in here. All right. So as you see, I've got a lot of these buckets created already, and they are binded to a particular region, and a lot of these buckets are accessible to the public. One of the buckets that I got is not public, and you can see the creation timestamp as well. Let's go ahead and create our own bucket and understand the whole process firsthand. Let's go click on this orange button on the top right hand side, create bucket, and then we just have to walk through this wizard, select the options that we got to create a S3 bucket. All right, so let's go ahead and give it a name. I'm going to name it as test. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the bucket name must be unique. There must not be any uppercases or spaces in the bucket name, right? That means that I cannot use the name as test, although it's in the lowercase, but somebody in the world across Amazon's namespaces might have used this name test, right? It's just like your domain name, right? So if you want to purchase a domain name, you should buy a domain that is unique and nobody else in the world should have used it. Bucket names are no different, right? So make sure that you give it a name which is kind of unique and more resembling to your enterprise, right? So I'm going to call it as, let's say, prod bucket, and put some random characters right next to it, right? At the end of this wizard, it's going to evaluate and check if this name exists. And if it exists, it's going to error out, okay? Now, the next option is a region. You got an array of regions to select from. You can choose any location in the world map, but it's always ideal and recommended to keep the bucket as closest to the user. So if you got your users probably in the East Coast or West Coast, you might want to select North Virginia or California respectively. Okay. Now just for demonstration purposes, I will select North Virginia and keep moving. The next option is granting permissions to people. If you are planning to host a static website where people access the content across geographies, then you would want to grant public access to your bucket, right? So if you're uploading certain pictures and videos and you want people on the internet to access it, right? So that's when you will go ahead and uncheck this box and keep going next. But make sure that you check this box which says I acknowledge that the current settings might result in this bucket and the objects within the bucket becoming public, okay? But if you would like to restrict permissions to specific people through access control lists and role-based access controls and permissioning model, then you have to check and uncheck these options and look around which one is best for your use case. But as you notice, the default option is to block all public access. That means when you create a bucket, by default, nobody will be able to access this bucket. That being said, let's go ahead and click on the Create Bucket button. All right, so our bucket is created and the bucket name prod bucket 121 was accepted. So in this list, let's go ahead and find that out. And it's easy to find our bucket, but if you got lots of bucket, let's say hundreds of buckets in your organization, then you got a search box where you can simply type the bucket name. And then this is our bucket. Let's click on this bucket and look at the various options that we have inside it. At this point, my bucket is empty, but then there's an upload button that you can click on and add files. You can either drag and drop or click on add files. So what I'm going to do is drag and drop a picture here. Okay. And that is actually a map of Azure data centers. And then I'll click on next. This is where you can grant permissions to that particular file. The file size is 28.7 KB, as you see it on the top right here. Okay. At this point, the owner or the root user has full permissions. He can read the object and has the permissions to read and write the object permissions as well. But as you scroll down, you will see something interesting. Do you want to grant public access? By default, the public read access is not granted. You can change the options by selecting this drop down menu and then select grant public read access instead of do not grant. But keep in mind that when we are creating the bucket, we selected block public access, and that's where the permissions are being inherited from. So top level permissions always rule and the bottom level permissions will be denied, right? So that's how it works. So top level permissions flow down to lower level objects by default. We'll go ahead and finish through this wizard, and moving forward we'll see how you can modify this to grant permissions to this particular file. Let's click on next. The next set of properties is all about what kind of storage class do you want to keep for that object. Do you want to keep that in standard or standard infrequent access or move it to glacier? We'll talk about these options later on in the subsequent lessons. The next option is about encryption. Do you want to encrypt the content of your S3 bucket? The content is not encrypted by default, but you have the options to encrypt it with either Amazon master key. That's where Amazon will keep the keys of encryption with themselves, but they also have given the option to encrypt it with your master key, which will be kept in your key management system. So keys to encrypt the S3 bucket will be kept in your KMS provided you have created a key, right? So right now looks like I have a KMS key, so I can encrypt the S3 bucket with my AWS KMS master key, right? But then KMS is a key management service, which is a managed service from AWS, which lets you manage the keys in terms of creation of a key, deletion, rotation of the key as well. But if that is too much of a headache for you and you don't want to manage the keys over yourself, you can go ahead and choose Amazon S3 master key or leave it as none if you don't want to encrypt it. Okay. I'll click on next here, and this is a summary where we can review. If you're happy with these settings, just click on upload. Now depending on the file size it may take some time, but looks like it was pretty quick. We've got 28.7 KB uploaded right here. Now I'll click on this file to look at its metadata. If you scroll down, there is a URL here which I can click on to access it. Alright, so now I will click on it to see what happens. I'll just right click and open in new tab. What I have here is access denied. Perfect, because we did not grant access to public for somebody to access our file. Now let's go back to the S3 console and see how you can grant permissions. To grant permissions, I gotta go back to the main bucket and then click on permissions. And this is where I'll be able to grant and deny access. Okay. By default, as we discussed, block all public access is on. What we have to do is edit this and uncheck this box, scroll down to the bottom and then save it. All right. There's a pop-up here and I gotta type confirm and just click on that. All right. Now the public access settings are updated successfully. Block all public access is set to off. I'm gonna go back and then look at the file and its properties, look at the URL and try to access my file now. Okay, so we'll just right click on this URL and open a new tab, and there you go. I'm able to see the content which is going through my URL in the S3 bucket. So that's how you make your web page publicly available. Let's take a step back and take a look at other important options we have inside the bucket. What's more important from an auditing perspective is that the auditor must know who's uploading the files, who's modifying the files, who's changing things, or rather, who's deleting data from your S3 bucket. This is part of the auditing. Now, auditing is provided by a service in Amazon which is called as CloudTrail. So if you click on these services and then look under management and governance, this little service called as CloudTrail, which is looking at every service and every action that you're doing inside your AWS account, right? So if I go back to S3, you will notice that I uploaded a file and CloudTrail knows about it. I really do not have to configure anything inside the S3 bucket to activate or enable CloudTrail. So I'm getting that default auditing set by CloudTrail. Okay. Now, if I navigate to properties, there are a lot of options that you can take a look at. For example, versioning, server access logging, static web hosting, object level logging, default encryption. What we're going to do is take a look at these options and other options inside it in the next lesson. What we know so far is that S3 is the object level storage where you can upload pictures, videos, files, etc. You can also grant permissions to public so that people can view your data from the internet. This is controlled using permissions. We also know that auditing of your S3 bucket is done by CloudTrail. Let's go and take a look at the properties option in the next lesson. Thanks for watching so far. I'll see you in the next lesson.